Welcome to Monuments to Movements SpeakEasy series. Today's conversation is Monuments to Climate Justice, Feminist Seed Bank. I'm Jane Sachs, along with Neysa Page-Lieberman. We are the co-founders and co-artistic directors of M2M. And we're quite excited to be joined by some of the most inspirational and innovative thinkers and makers that we know, and we're sure that you're going to agree. Before we get started, I want to draw your attention to our prompt that was on the intro slide and now is being posted in the chat. We ask you to consider, who is your community in 1 to 5 words or so. Community can be place, history, culture, spirit, identity, or however you define it. And this will be connected to a second prompt later. So we really would love you to be part of this process. Please enter your answers into the chat. We're asking you to participate because Monuments to Movements works to shift the conversation around why, how, what, and who is monumentalized. Your participation makes the dialogue more complicated and much richer. I don't think most of us have ever seen the narratives of our communities monumentalized in public space. This exercise is meant to empower and encourage each other to imagine our monuments and to enact them. Later, we'll post the second part of this prompt, and we'll be able to read some of our ideas together. So now I want to welcome you to SpeakEasy, M2M's public series, where we discuss current initiatives and with our collaborators and related pressing ideas and how we might shift the dialogue through our work together. We kicked off SpeakEasy over a year ago, and this is season 2. If you haven't seen our exciting lineup, grab the links in the chat, and you can view all of the past programs, and you can register for future ones. You can also see a 15-minute highlight reel, and you'll be able to see the whole season. And I know that you'll want more after you see that. Now, a few housekeeping notes. Today's program will be recorded and uploaded on YouTube and on the M2M website. Chat is also enabled, and we'll be popping in links there that relate to topics we're discussing or the people who are speaking. There'll be a live transcript, and that's been enabled. And finally, when we get to the Q&A portion, please enter your questions using the Q&A tool. That's where we'll be looking, and we can add your ideas to the conversation. If this is your introduction to Monuments to Movements, let me give you a little bit of an overview. M2M is an international initiative that envisions, develops, creates, and commissions public art that monumentalizes movement making and collective action. M2M and Project Dan create new models for collective participation and responsive culture within artistic feminist practices to build a more just and humane world. M2M offers an evolving process that is not just inclusive of the world's diversity, but also paradigm shifting in restorative justice. We work in the past, the present, and the future. M2M is a movement of civic storytelling, visibility, agency, collective action, and equitable participation through the arts. M2M is a movement organization. Our team includes Marcela Andrade, Kelsey Bogdan, Josue, Esau, and Aarya, Malik. We are joined by an expansive, active international community of movement builders numbering over 60 and over 50 think tank members. Currently, we're working on monuments such as this one focused on climate justice that will engage today, and other initiatives include monuments to evolving democracies, to human infrastructure. Along with the SpeakEasy series, we created a commissioned short essay series, Deeper Story, and the first ever archive of public art in movement building and more. Within the context of rolling heads and empty pedestals, the necessity to create M2M, monuments to movements, to collective action, to what we do together emerged. It is in this context of missing questions, missing voices, missing people and places, approaches and processes that Neysa and I, and now this growing team, created M2M. It is on this fertile ground that we come together today to talk about a monument to climate justice, the Feminist Seed Bank. Now I finally get to introduce our guests. So please know that my pronunciations will not be flawless, but my respect is fierce, ever present, and very, very excited. So let me introduce first Mapenzi Chibale Nonó, who is half of the Afro-diasporic collective Nietas de Nonó, along with sibling Mulawai. In their creative process, they evoke ancestral memory through personal archives. Their practices incorporates performance, found objects, organic materials, ecology, fiction, video, and installation. They created Illustraciones de la Mecánica, a multimedia installation commissioned by the 10th Berlin Biennale and the 79th Whitney Biennial. They have received the Latinx Artist Fellowship from the U.S. Latinx Art Forum, the Rome Prize in Visual Art from the American Academy of Rome, the Art for Change from the Ford Foundation, to name just a few. You'll hear that phrase often. Their art has been shown in Haiti, in Cuba, in the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Ecuador, England, Germany, Italy, Norway, Scotland, and the United States. They co-founded Parceleras Afrocaribeñas, an organization run by Black women where spaces for environmental and racial justice are created in the face of industrial developments that threaten their barrio of San Anton in Carolina, Puerto Rico. Their first solo exhibition was recently on view at Artist Space in New York. Altyn Kapalova is a feminist activist, artist, curator, scholar, and children's book author based in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. She creates experimental art based on the results of her anthropological research in science, art, and politics. Altyn's vast research and curatorial projects aim to make the voices of vulnerable communities louder, to influence political decisions and political structures. Her curatorial expertise covers visual arts, theater, creative writing. She's the founder of the Museum of Feminist Art and the curator for the first Feminnale of Contemporary Art. She's also a research fellow at the University of Central Asia. Altyn is widely recognized for publicly and legally confronting misogynistic norms and laws and raising awareness about urgently needed human rights reforms. And Melissa Hilliard Potter is a feminist interdisciplinary artist, writer, and curator whose work has been exhibited in numerous venues, including White Columns, Bronx Museum of the Arts, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, again, to name a few. Her films have been screened in international film festivals such as Cinefable and the Reeling International LGBT Film Festival. Potter has been the recipient of 3 Fulbright Scholar grants, as well as funding from the CEC, ArtsLink, Trust for Mutual Understanding, the Soros Fund, and Arts for Culture. As a curator, Potter's exhibitions include Social Paper, Handmaking in the Context of Socially Engaged Art, with Jessica Cochran, and Revolution at Point Zero, Feminist Social Practices with Neysa Page-Lieberman. Her curatorial and recent hand papermaking projects include Seeds in Service with Maggie Puckett, and they have been funded by Crafts Research Fund, Clinton Hill Foundation, and the Maker Grant. A prolific writer, her critical essays have been printed in Bomb, Arts Papers, Flash Art, and After Image, among others. Potter is a professor at Columbia College Chicago, and I can't thank you enough, all of you, for being here today. Thank you. We're going to start with Melissa.
Yes, just to give a broad overview of the project. And I just want to give thanks to my fellow presenters. It's such an honor to be with you, and to Neysa and Jane, who have been so supportive in this project, to the Kemper Family Foundation, and to all of our other supporters who make everything possible to think as big and expansively as we're trying to be. So the Feminist Seed Bank, just to give some context, is a bank of knowledge meant to be as metaphoric as actual, engaging plant-based practices cultivated by women. We define a plant-based practice as an art, craft, medicine, or spiritual tradition that generates from a seed. The Feminist Seed Bank is a bank of knowledge, not unlike a literal seed bank, that locates, interprets, preserves, and celebrates plants and the practices germinating from them. Next slide, please. So this work builds on more than a decade of my interdisciplinary collaborations with ethnographers, scientists, artisans, gardeners, to name just a few. And the project outcomes take many forms: film, data collection, artist books, posters, performances, and craft objects, as well as international collaborations. Next slide, please. So this is a very classic example of something that I've been working on since 2014. This is a data collection tool that intersects the uses of plants for medicine, craft, and spiritual practice with craft practices. For instance, in my case, hand paper making, which was the original use of the post-Roe v. Wade transmenopause garden. So now for almost 10 years, we've been collecting information on these plants intersectionally. Next slide, please. Chicago has been an incredibly warm and welcoming place and has helped me bring more than 20 years of research in the former Soviet Balkan republics. This is a project at with 6018 North, the Chicago Gallery, and the Chicago Architecture Biennial, animating the disappearing histories of flax and hemp practices. I was doing, in this case, a performance talking about the histories of hand paper making with flax and the histories of textiles in a local garden here in Chicago. Next slide, please. And artist books play a massive role. This was an exciting opportunity with my wonderful collaborator, Maggie Puckett, for Seeds in Service. We celebrated 10 years of our work together by creating an artist book called An Illuminated Feminist Seed Bank, which was deposited at the Global Seed Vault Mountain in Svalbard, Norway, meant to animate the stories of the seeds that are housed there. Next slide, please. So that's a bit where we are, and this is where we're going. Kelly Church is an Indigenous Black ash basket maker who I discovered through research here in Chicago with my wonderful collaborator, Susanna Papish of Boundary Gallery. So she has really animated an incredible history for us on seed saving and on Indigenous practices that are affected by climate change. If you would go to the next slide, please. On Thursday, Susanna and I are launching a book called Invisible Labors, Profiling Women Working with the Land in Southside Chicago. The book was designed by the great Tamara Becerra Valdez. And here we see an interview with Kelly Church talking about her practice and its relationship to the sovereignty of her people. Next slide, please. We visited Janine Antoni at the Kansas field station at the University of Kansas, curated by Joey Orr of the Spencer Museum. This is her listening path, a labyrinth, considering the prairie and listening closely to the changing biome of the prairie. Next slide, please. We just came back from a trip to the Venice Biennale, where we saw many brilliant artists, including Shernawe Hakehiwe, who I worked with at the Center for Book and Paper for many years, creating collaborations in hand paper making, animating his unique history of mark making, which he learned from his mother. Next slide, please. And most recently, Kyrgyzstan. Through CEC Arts Link funding, Neysa and I were able to participate in the Trash Festival, considering the endangerment of the Bishkek River. If you would go to the next slide, please. I taught a compost refuse papermaking workshop to children whose families gather recycling from an area where there's the largest trash dump in the city. This is violently polluting the city's air and water. In this case, an ancient craft is repurposed for feminist uses of care, community engagement, and trash consideration. And I will add also that the children were the most remarkable I had ever worked with. I taught them, and within 5 minutes, they had literally taken over the whole procedure themselves. Always a process of learning and evolving in how we can build this bank and think about our collaborations. And last slide, please. I'm so excited that Altyn is going to be talking about the incredible disappearing practice of chi, which is a grass-based intangible heritage practice practiced by women. It originates from the steppes in Kyrgyzstan and the adjacent countries of that region. I had the incredible opportunity to, with one of our trash festival organizers, Sinyat Zoldosheva, to interview her grandmothers who are here, Charnu Bubu and Truhan Bubu, and they walked us through the entire process. And I leave you with my wonderful co-presenter here, Altyn, who we met with. You'll see us on the right, who shared with us her incredible Museum of Feminist Art. So thank you. And now I turn it over to Altyn.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm so happy that you finished with the Chi artist. Yeah, I'm representing today the Museum of Feminist and Queer Art, and I'm going to talk about traditional mental health recovering practices among women in Kyrgyz society, and about feminist art in Kyrgyzstan. And I tried to connect these two areas. I hope it works. Next slide, please. Yeah, well, I started recently the research about traditional mental health practices, and I will just share some research findings. This is not a research findings, but like first field data. Well, in Kyrgyz traditional practices of recovering women's mental health, in my culture, they're always closely connected with the nature, with stones, with plants, and with water. For example, the practice of sharing your emotional pain with the river. You go to the river, stand along the river, and speak to the water in the direction of the flow. So there is a belief that water will take your pain. This photo was made 5 years ago during the art residency, which called Three River Stories. And here you can see Olcha and Oksana. They were participants of this art event. Next slide, please. Yeah, and here you can see chi. This is a plant, as you can see. And in Kyrgyz culture, folk crafts were also very closely connected to the plants. And now I will try to show this connection. And in next slides, I want to show this connection. Here you can see chi. I don't know the word in English. I think it is reed, and it was used for both for creativity purposes and also for mental health practices. For example, in this photo, you can see how it is made. So with the help of wool, reeds were raped, and then as a result, we have pattern dividers. Please, next slide. Yeah, here you see this divider. This is in yurt. This is traditional one-room house. In traditional culture, and we had only this divider between, it's not real rooms, but just to try to have some personal space. And this is pretty high and long. And just to give an idea about a really great work of Kyrgyz women. Yeah, next slide, please. This is archival photo of Kyrgyz women who are doing work with chi. Of course, this work is invisible and unpaid. Next slide, please. Here you can see Sadagul. She's a craft woman, and the photo was made by contemporary photo and video artist Sania in the frame of her project Felt Feelings and Freedom. She has a photo project when she wants to show that all this folk art has faces and names. That is why I want to pronounce every name, because in Kyrgyz society, artists, female artists, they're invisible. And now what we're doing in our Museum of Feminist and Queer Art, we just want to highlight every artist whom we present. Yes, please, next slide. Yeah, this is Chi Kurchak dolls, traditional dolls. And now we don't have, I mean, it's not popular to use them, but I'm so happy because I noticed that contemporary artists, they have been using these traditional techniques. And in next 2 slides, I want to show these works. Yeah, this photo I made recently, a few days ago, and it was made in the frame of the Eco exhibition. As I understood, it was made by young artists, and the work about dreams. Here you see another work. Jazgul Madazimova, she called her work Beyond the Red Line, and this work is dedicated to the memory of 17 Kyrgyz migrant workers who burned in a printing house in Moscow just because employers didn't follow the safety rules. And she used these dolls just to share her emotional pain. And I was so impressed of her work. And in 4 years ago, I made the exhibition Feminnale. Next slide, please. And the Feminnale brought together more than 15 artists from more than 20 countries. And the Feminnale was 17 days because of this 17 women, but it was censored by the government and physically attacked by right group activists. And I was cancelled as an artist and as a curator. And now, until now, I don't have access to the museums and state galleries, and we don't have other spaces to display works. And that is why, since all my friends, feminist and queer friends, we don't have access to the museums, we decided that we will have our own museum. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we founded Museum of Feminist and Queer Art, and we are promoting Central Asian artists and trying to just to keep ourselves. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, and the lack of access to the public art spaces forced me to step outside of the official walls, and I made one of my work. This is kinetic and sound sculpture dedicated to the memory of thousands and thousands of Kyrgyz people who died when they were running from Russian army in the beginning of 20th century. And this sculpture also located in a high mountain area, so you should spend about 40 minutes to reach this place. Next slide, please. And for me, this is also like healing process, because this is national trauma, and nobody apologized for the deaths of thousands people. So because I was offered to make it in the town or everywhere, but I decided to make it in high mountain area. Yeah, and here is the last slide, just to show the sculpture itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Altyn and Melissa, for sharing. I'm very grateful to be and to join this conversation. I speak to you from Boriken, the oldest colony of the United States. And as it is stated in the report by Elivia Martinez in Monsanto's Caribbean Experiment Series, the island is an important center for 8 companies, 7 of them multinationals, that are developing the first generation of genetically modified seeds for distribution to the United States and around the world. Within this context, I am going to share 3-minute excerpt from the video Foodtopia, Después de Todo Territorio, and then come back to the conversation. Can you play the video, please? Thank you.
Fiabata diende metal won onarwu ni wanweomi. La warba se wutun mi hifi metal won onarwu ni wanweomi. Fihovo se wu ke yondo tami hifi metal won onarwu ni wanweomi. Emango se wu ke yondo ifiba hifi metal won onarwu ni wanweomi. Kramba wala wu miklo al empa me kepamiwa olile ahí umba wiba mango shem wa matiwala basahira.
wa visión como poyewe.
Audio on, okay, off, thank you. Foodtopia, después de todo territorio, recorded in 2020, is a durational performance that documents 28 days of foraging as a practice to create a living archive of our own surroundings. Our community has historically been a neighborhood of Afro-Caribbean family plots where families have passed their knowledge of plants, healing practice, and fruit harvest from generation to generation. As a result of the zoning change from residential to industrial, this panorama of plots have been threatened by displacement. Foodtopia process proposed an approach from our experience as artists demanding the protection of our lands. It was made from the context of an island that imports 80% of food and has 7 transgenic seed multinationals. Next slide, please. Thank you. As part of this piece, we wanted to include a wardrobe that could be used daily so that we didn't have to think about clothes every day before foraging. And that way we freed up time and energy. The pattern of the clothing, how you are seeing, it's inspired by the plant, seed, and fruit considered native to the Antilles. You can go to the next slide, please. The caimito, or star apple in English, is a seasonal fruit which is not commercially produced in Puerto Rico. It has healing properties for pneumonia and laryngitis, as well as other medicinal properties. In our neighborhood, people appreciate the tree for its shade, its rich fruit, and its beautiful golden brown leaves. And it is within that symbolism of carrying a seed to a possible future from an Afro-Caribbean aesthetic. The seed in this context is seen as a witness and guide that carries knowledge, spells, witness, protest, protection, and honor. It collaborates in the process of collecting and decoding information that can be passed to present and future generation. And the seed in this context, it stands for resistance against genetically modified seed. Thank you. Sorry, before leaving this, I wanted, so the pattern, it's inspired by the seed of the caimito, how you see it, the fruit itself with the seeds, and also on the top, it's the draft or the design that converted into a pattern, and then the costume. And actually, sometimes, you know, fruit trees are not considered plants because, but yeah, that's how the dialogues of these plants can be transferred to other as a physical protection.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Mapenzi, and Melissa and Altyn for sharing your presentations. I can't wait to dive in with all of you. First, we are going to look at some of your answers as you shared with us who your communities are. And these are just gorgeous answers. I'm going to start with myself, that I am a warrior mama smashing the patriarchy. And the reason I chose that part of my community today is because the original warrior mama is on this call watching. That would be my mother. And I'm sure that there are many other warrior mamas Smashing the patriarchy on this call. So that's a quick, personal shout out to my mom. We also heard from many others, and I'm sorry if I don't get to everybody, but here's the first ones that rolled in. Global conscious thinkers and creators, queer trans feminist artists in and around Takaranto, called today Toronto, and surrounding rural communities. The Bishkek School of Contemporary Art, 2 years long in this history and an independent spirit. Artists, makers throughout history and the world, Latinos, Indigenous peoples, the land. My community is anyone looking for what is shared across our cultures, borders, and practices. My community is one that is not always seen, but is always heard. Truth, creativity, nature, art, music, love. My community is a process of discovery. My community is generous, kind colleagues. And the last one I'm going to read is progressive Muslim Turkish American art historian, Oak Park dad. So thank you for all of these. I love the mix of very specific and literal and very imaginative and conceptual. And it's exactly why we do this exercise, because everybody defines their community in a different way. And if you were at a different speakeasy, you might have brought a different part of your community with you that day. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to go ahead and share the second prompt, which is, now that we know which communities are with us today, we are asking you to describe a monument to your community. And again, you don't need to imagine a fully conceived monument. You can share something like location, medium, representation, narrative, anything you want. And again, in just a few words, share with us the first things that come to your mind as you imagine a monument to your community. And we'll get back to those answers a little later on. So I'm going to transition to Q&A with our panelists. And I just want to say again how thrilled we are to be joined by Melissa, Mapenzi, and Altyn. And together, as you saw, they're representing the very expansive practices they bring to the table, and that we hope is at the heart of the Feminist Seed Bank, expansive thinking. So the origin of this conversation began with our desire at M2M to create a monument to climate justice at the intersection of feminist strategies. And Melissa Potter, for many years, has been envisioning a feminist seed bank and co-authored a book called The Illuminated Feminist Seed Bank. And this project, researches, creates, and preserves plant-based practices that have traditionally been cultivated by women. And so we, looked at what she was doing and saw, okay, this is really, movement building, monument building, and saw this natural intersection with our vision to build a monument to climate justice. So if you are hearing the words, plant-based practice and kind of wondering what that is, so you got some beautiful definitions today through everyone's presentations and saw the many ways that can be defined. We define plant-based practice as things made for art, medicine, and spiritual purposes. So the Feminist Seed Bank is very much a bank of knowledge that carries culture and passes it on from one generation to the next. It's designed to be larger than any one contributor. It's a constantly expanding project, and it's going to include multitudes of collaborators, places, and histories around the globe. It's very much modeled after our mission at M2M in equitable and accessible participation. And with each new work that somebody suggests to us or adds to this bank of knowledge, the shape and the scope of the project will be expanded. And so the conversations we're having today and all of your participation in the audience so far, and hopefully beyond this, will continue to open up the possibilities for how we build this bank of knowledge. So as we now continue to our Q&A, we've been looking at some of these examples that our panelists have shared today. And I wanted to give everybody one more opportunity to think about, these practices and transitions that are, again, historically stewarded by women that get passed down generationally, and thinking about these as vessels of cultural identity and sovereignty. Can you share another plant-based practice that has impacted or inspired your work or the work of someone else? So another plant-based practice that you didn't have a chance to introduce in your presentation. Melissa, I'd love to start with you.
Well, I presented flax, but I want to just bring the conversation into the ways that something can be panoramic culturally. So flax has an incredible history in Europe, and that's what I presented. And it's traditionally a woman's craft to cultivate, spin, and make into textiles and other fiber-based practices. However, here in the United States, flax has a really particular history. And I want to amplify that history, which is that the abolition movement in the United States has focused a lot on the men who have stewarded that process. One of the earliest being Benjamin Lay, who was a Quaker. He fought for abolition of slavery as early as the late 1600s. Some of the women of that Quaker community, for instance, Lucretia Mott, had husbands who were Quaker and believed in divestment, but were still very much involved in textile practices that engaged slave practice and slave labor. And so Lucretia Mott and some of her Quaker comrades convinced their partners to divest from cotton, and there was a movement to resurrect flax practice as a divestment from slavery in the United States. And that's a very woman-focused type of activism, because flax practice was traditionally female practice. It had become semi-industrialized through cotton. And it was through some of these early women that we thought of its resurrection for purposes that are liberatory, right? So I think that's also at the heart of the Feminist Seed Bank, is that we think about the ways these practices can be preserved, but also how they can be liberatory. And that's certainly what I see in Mapenzi and Altyn's practices, that we're thinking about these practices as ways to really change and shift a society.
Mapenzi, would you like to go next?
Okay. So I think I want to develop more the idea of plants that produce fruit, because have been an integral part of the woman in my family. I remember an aunt passing on ethnobotanical knowledge and Afro-Indigenous techniques to us. I remember her bringing me juice squeezed from fruit trees and telling me the story of how long these trees have sustained us, how the juice is prepared, and what benefit it has. I didn't understand the importance of that information at that time, but I accepted as a part of our connection. And now as an adult, I came to understand how those moments have been key in my practice of community activism and in my aesthetic, how much of that information is present in the work of Utopia and in the community-based projects in which I collaborate. And so I grew up really thinking about how the women in my family have been carrying on this knowledge and passing generation to generation. And now the value of all these stories and elements that are embedded in my practice, in our practice, and the responsibility also to share that information, and also to create work that can be a way to, ¿cómo se dice? Archivar, to that works as an archive for that knowledge.
Thank you. Altyn, would you like to answer as well?
Yeah. I just wanted to add that I wasn't able to show it, but Melissa, you and Neysa, you were visiting Kyrgyzstan, and you might notice, but that we have this bank of patterns, traditional patterns, and most of them they were created by women during the felt making, carpet making, embroidering, and most of these traditional patterns they are plant-based. I think if someone will make a research of these patterns, it might be a book of plants which we have or we had and don't have anymore in our land. So now I have an idea that someone should make a research how the plants represented in the Kyrgyz craft, which made by Kyrgyz women. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. You know, you mentioned Melissa and my trip to Kyrgyzstan, and we were asking so many questions about exactly what you're talking about these motifs, these symbols, what they meant, and you know, some of the people we were speaking with were sharing that it came from a specific fruit or plant, and the richness behind that. And it's funny because this is what Mapenzi was just talking about in their textiles and their clothing, which I have to say, when I watched your film, Mapenzi, I immediately Googled who you credited for the textile design, because I was transfixed by those patterns in your clothing. And I knew that they meant something, but I didn't know what it was. And so I'm so glad you illuminated that in your presentation today. And Melissa is also bringing, you know, these histories to the forefront, right? And so this leads perfectly to our next question about collecting and knowing this knowledge. And so a lot of what you're talking about, to me, also alludes to resilience, and the resilience of these plants, the resilience of these practices, the resilience of the people who, like Mapenzi, your mother, who was sharing this information with you, and Altyn, you're talking so much about the survival and those that didn't survive the conflicts throughout Kyrgyzstan. And so sometimes these seeds act as the most resilient parts of our culture and our history. So I want to talk about this idea of knowing seeds and knowing the stories and understanding the resilience. So you know, we're talking about the risks at hand here, the risks that are you know, confronting people and confronting plant life. And we've talked a little bit about climate crisis in other conversations with you all, where we've talked about industrialization and war and gender bias. And so I want to talk about the ideas of resilience in your work and in the subject matters that you explore. Altyn, would you like to go first on this one? Yeah, okay. Mapenzi, would you like to talk about resilience?
Well, I think I have a story to share. I grew up with the symbol of the Sankofa philosophy, as it is part of the aesthetic of the gates or doors in the house here in Bishkek. So the doors and then the symbols. Of course, I don't know what it belonged to or what it means consciously, right? But I remember constantly drawing the silhouette of the Sankofa when I found their symbol stamped on iron. And it is a way of remembering and imagining for the future that I was kind of spelling, right, when I was a child. It is from there that I am interested in being resilient in my practice, acknowledging, remembering, honoring, offering, shaping my avatar as a daily exercise of deep reflection in my practice and my work.
Thank you. Melissa, would you like to add something to the idea of resilience in the seeds and in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things. I'm just finishing up a interview with an incredible curator named Jenny Sorkin, and talking about collaboration as a feminist practice, and thinking about some of the great women philosophers like Silvia Federici, who I'm completely obsessed with. talking about how all things are actually collaborative and embracing the fact that through collaboration, we can expand the meaning and the applications of what we do. So for me, a form of resilience is to not be only concerned with the practice that I do. It's to engage other people in other disciplines, to think creatively about how what I'm doing has adjacency and vice versa. And I think that that's what contributes to evolution of practice. I always go back to Kelly Church because she's the person who most recently has sort of exploded my mind around these topics of what will the world be like without the black ash tree, right? I think in climate crisis, we talk a lot about, you know, sort of the positive ideas of saving things and what can be saved, but accepting also that there will be things we cannot. And so resilience is also thinking about how collectively we can evolve practices to live through these times. I think that's a really important aspect of resilience. Altyn, what do you think?
I actually have another question that I'd love to start with Altyn on. So, you know, a lot of times in our discussions around the Feminist Seed Bank, we connect it so much to our practices, right? And so we talk about the feminist potentials of ourselves and our practices as we talk about the feminist potentials for plants. And so I would love for Altyn to talk about, because I know feminist practices are so deeply ingrained in everything you do in your history gathering. And so how do you see these connections between your own feminist practices and the ways that nature may behave in a feminist way in its own potential?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Neysa. Before I told about these dolls, Chikurchak, and actually we are losing them because of climate change, because this chi itself, now it's really hard to find it. And the second reason, we lost a lot of our traditions during Soviet time. It was 70 years, and we lost traditional knowledge, we lost techniques, actually we lost our identity. And now I'm just so happy. As I said, it's not popular anymore. Nobody makes these dolls, but it somehow it has been saving in art among artists, women artists. And I before showed these dolls and art projects related to these dolls. Actually, I have old one here. I forgot to show it before, but they look like this, and this is the most important part. It's like background. I mean, here you can see this plant, and this doll is pretty old. I took it by one amazing woman, Gulmira, who is collecting these dolls, and I have two of them. You can hear this. I'm like, I don't know, showing everyone everything what I have. I just wanted to say that feminist artists actually they're keeping traditions and traditional knowledge as well, because there is a stigma in my country that if you are the feminist artist, then you are like Western or you are paid by Western organizations. But in fact, feminist artists, they have been keeping traditional knowledge, and they are doing really great work on converting this knowledge to the more modern form. It helps just save some knowledge about ourselves, who we are. If we don't have Russia, you know.
Thank you so much. I loved seeing the dolls. I mean, that was the highlight of this conversation so far. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to go to audience. So if you have a question, please put it in Q&A. That is where we are looking to grab the questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A tool. Okay, so this question is about is future facing. You know, a lot of the work we're doing is not just thinking about solely preserving the past or maintaining the present, but it's also about impacting the future, right? I think all of us are always thinking about the work we're doing now, helping future generations. And so in impacting the future, you know, we're combining past traditions and future aspirations by which we can grow and acclimate and expand. So I'd like to start with you, Mapenzi. Can you talk about how, you know, imagining the future relates to the work that you're doing?
Neysa, can you share again the question? Sorry.
Absolutely. So we're thinking about how we are keeping the future at the forefront of our thinking. So as we preserve the past and the present and think about how we can share these traditions and share the knowledge that we're gaining, how we are also thinking about how the past and present impacts the future.
Yeah, I can share, like, for example, some strategies that we have focused on in the context of community organizing, are exercising the right to permanence through land rescue and advocacy against especially zoning change. So because land speculation threatens the permanence of our community in Puerto Rico and their biodiversity. These spaces contain memory that is history and is the essence to continue creating possible future. So in order to think, those possible futures, what we are doing is exercising in the present, how we can sustain collective practice that can envision a legacy. I grew up with the responsibility, of course, of owning a legacy from the past generation, and I think the work that we do also carry on that inspiration in order to create, but not looking the future as a long distance practice, like in the present, how we can in the present moment exercising that vision and shaping. Yeah, it's exciting also to create those possibilities, and of course it's require deeply understanding of what it's mean collective practice.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I'm just like talking, going, why can no one hear me? Melissa, would you like to follow up, please? Thank you.
I think that Mapenzi what I love about what Mapenzi had to say is that it's not abstract. I think the biggest failure of our conversations around climate futures, around feminist futures, is abstraction. This idea that we think of the future as some monolith to work towards. And so what I appreciate deeply is this idea that we really lay claim to specifics, that we lay claim to questions around land sustainability for specific people under certain conditions. And I think that, this is also at the heart of first world privileging, that, we get to all think. I mean, honestly, the Trash Festival blew my mind in that way. And I'm endlessly thankful to Burmette and her team for helping me understand, it's one thing to do a recycling workshop here in the United States where people don't even see their recycling or where it goes and actually still believe that it's part of a future that we can create. And another thing to be working with children whose families' lives depend on collecting that recycled material, and what it means for what it means to have skin in the game in that way. And so for me, the future also has to be about where we have our skin in the game and where we're going to be making those sacrifices and putting our hearts and souls into making that change in ways that are not abstract. But, you know, Mapenzi, I thank you for being really specific about what it means to dig into the future.
Thank you both. I think what you're saying about being concrete, you know, it's not only a privilege, but it's also like a gift to be able to think of the future in the present. And most people around the world don't have that luxury. And so there is this idea in many Western countries, definitely here in the United States, that, you know, the future is invisible and it's not connected to who we are right now. There's also an idea that our past is also not connected to who we are right now either. So I think this idea of living in all tenses of the verb simultaneously is so important to all of your work. I am going to read some of the responses to the idea of what a monument to your community might look like, feel like, you know, be experienced. One is, I envision an easel with painting of many types of females, ages, ethnicities, and nearby a palette with each color well depicting issues related to strong women, climate, art, and education. Another one was the Silk Road. Another is a long tunnel, open-ended on each side so people can come anytime, stay, leave, come back, or never, or not come back. A blue light screen that illuminates only in the dark. A monument to all the resilient and restless activists, makers, and scholars who dedicate their work to dismantle the constructs of oppression. And another one, a singing sculpture, a choir of people saying how they, as a community, met their needs. We are actually working on something that is very much like that, a singing sculpture. Let me just follow up with, again, a personal and maybe very concrete question, which is like, what are the things that you're most proud of or really fill your soul that you're doing that, that really can take on a different property and meaning for you than, say, your practice or your work, but what really shapes you and helps you think about what you're trying to do? All right, like, you know, jump in whenever you want, or I might have to force you. What about Mel? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more interested in hearing what Mapenzi has to say, but I mean, I'm going to go back again to collaboration. I think in the art world, we give it a lot of lip service, but I think that trying to let go of my ego is what really makes me feel like I'm making a contribution in quelling all of the egotistical nonsense that the art world foists upon us every day, every moment, every hour, and trying to think about how 2 voices in the room can be like 5, 10 voices in the room can be like 100 can be like 1,000. I mean, just thinking about our most recent project in Kyrgyzstan, how, you know, a small, mighty team of people can move mountains and shift ideas. And then I shift those ideas when I share with my students. So I'm trying to think less about me and think more about other people and the ways that our work together exponentially grows.
And that could also be applied to the physical world, the geographic world, about kind of melting these borders. I mean, they're all made up anyway. So this idea of where you start and where somebody else, you know, begins. Mapenzi?
Okay, I need just a resume of that question because I lose a little bit of it. Thank you.
Just thinking about what really impacts you as a human being. You know, yes, your practice, and yes, your vision of what you're trying to do, and the work you do and who you work with. But for you, what is something that really feeds your soul, really makes it possible for you to be who you are and also be able to expand who you are? I don't know if that's a question, however, it's the one I'm posing to you.
Thank you, Jane. Wow, that's a lot. That's a big question, and I am thinking about, you know, the communities that I grew up. I have been learning so much. I am very, very, yes, like happy to also see how the terms of like collaboration, but also how, sorry, I'm a little, yeah. How those two communities that I grew up practice exchange and sharing as a way of live and as a strategy to sustain ourselves. I think that impact me a lot. And I can identify my earliest memories of community, a sense of interdependence, which means sustaining ourselves as a collectivity is a process rooted in exchange, right? So I grew up seeing how people put their resources at the collective service. The food that was cooked always provided for more people because the idea was that there were many more of us than those who cohabitate. I don't know how to pronounce it well, but that's fine. And I carried that information with me in actually my performance, in my social practice, and in my ideas. This is how I think of the spectator actually when they are in contact with my work, that we are exchanging energy, thoughts, ideas, emotion. I grew up watching my grandfather sharing his land with his neighbor for the exchange of plants, of animals. And those actions are what have allowed me to learn the history of my community in others. So I think like all of that inspired me a lot. Like I really am very grateful to be part of seeing that and to have experienced that. And also I think that's truly embedded in my practice. Actually, I collaborate with Mulawayi, which is my sister, and that for us has been like a big gift because because we are actually shaping and sharing also that space of sharing knowledge and our practice in a way that help us to listen each other, to truly think what our collaboration means. So all of that inspired my work.
That's wonderful. I think that it's an interesting, it's not really, well, I feel like in the arts, we go towards the tension, like there's a question, there's something we need to figure out. But I think it's an interesting thing because, you know, people think collaboration is often like flattening out and making beige, right? And that's not the idea, is that you do come as you are, and there is a difference between people, and that is what makes a collaboration. It's not like a kind of flat agreement, but it also is about the tension between our interdependency and our solitudes, right? Because we still are a person. Altyn, do you wanna answer that?
Sadly, I think we have lost Altyn, and so she it's offline now. She might have lost power.
Okay.
She may have also, you know, had to put the dolls to bed because it's almost midnight in Kyrgyzstan, and so we have asked people to come at challenging times. So I guess we're rounding out the program now. We have just a couple of minutes left. So I just wanted to thank Altyn. She will see this later and feel our gratitude later. And Mapenzi and Melissa for joining us. You are, you know, our dream team as far as who could have joined this conversation today. You're coming from such different places, conceptually, artistically, creatively, geographically, yet there's so much intersection here. And that's exactly what is inspiring this work, to show how we are exchanging our information across time zones and across tenses, and to really expand this knowledge, this bank of knowledge, the Feminist Seed Bank, and connecting this, of course, to how we can fight the climate crisis. And so we are in so much gratitude for the three of you for coming today, and for our whole M2M team for making this work behind the scenes, and to everyone who has joined and contributed so generously and so graciously with your ideas around monumentalizing your communities. I just want to ask you all to please fill out the survey. It's very quick. We're posting it in chat now. You can grab that link now and fill it out whenever, but it really helps us strengthen this program and figure out how to continue to increase our reach, our accessibility, the topics that we're covering. If you really liked what you saw today and would like to donate to the M2M project, we do have a match that kicked off on Giving Tuesday and goes to the end of the year. So any amount that you donate is matched by other donors. Many of you donated when you registered for this program, and that did not go unseen. We are very appreciative of everybody that has contributed to keep this program free for others. We also, just a quick shout out to the next Speakeasy in January. It is going to be moderated by Red Tremmel. It is called Pleasure Publics and Erotic Political Imaginaries. That's going to be on January 18th. And we also have a deeper story, our next short essay coming out this week by Ai-jen Poo, who is on our think tank and is the president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Mwah.